Okay. So have we got even a rough message? We haven't given a lot of time, obviously.
The Eco Basket is a form of livelihood for disadvantaged and single women. These baskets need to be promoted at exhibitions and bazaars. And we need to promote them. Please contact Mary for volunteerism.
Okay.
As a basket promoter.
Okay. Yep, it's clear. You've got to contact. Who is the person? Who am I as a volunteer? Who am I going to help?
I say that the Eco Basket is a form of livelihood for disadvantaged and
Yeah.
single women.
Look, there's millions of disadvantaged women. Why should I help a group of disadvantaged women?
Uncertain future.
What about one woman that I can identify with? She doesn't have to be real.
Giving a name to that.
A name or a personality, or like Rosita is a single mother with a disabled child and can't go out to work.
So we highlight the plight of a
particular person. And that then tugs at my heartstrings because I can identify with Rosita. It must be awful. Maybe I could do something. Good, but you've got details, you've got who to contact, you've got I'm going to rush across to our friends here. I'm not giving you time to think, but let's have a draft. Let's have a stab at it.
From the story that we did. Ruby, age 25, an executive, has just been diagnosed with SLE. She suffers from rashes on her face, joint pains, and rapid hair loss. She feels very depressed and scared about this relatively unknown disorder. Her family and friends are also uncertain about SLE. We need para-counselors who can lend a listening ear to Ruby and her family. Full training will be provided. Contact Cecilia.
That's it, perfect. I feel for Ruby. I feel for her. She's, I know her already. So I think, really, I want to help. The only thing that's missing is how big is my commitment going to be? Am I going to have to sit with Ruby day in and day out? But you have to. How long am I going to have to spend? How often will I have to be there? But that hook is there. That's got me. I definitely want to help Ruby.
You have 1 day in a week.
2 hours a week.
2 hours a week is great. It suits me fine.
Does this also be also similar right up if we were to do a black and white thing? It's a letter to send out, or a newsletter that we send out. It can also be the same kind of.
It can be in a newsletter, it can be on your website, it can be in a poster. I mean, the question is, where would you put the message? Local news sheets, posters in libraries, letters to companies, presentations to groups, direct mailing, emails, website. I mean, it's interesting, this lady here was a maths teacher and she was coming up to retirement and she didn't really want to not do anything at all, but she didn't know what. And just at that point, the NGO here sent letters to the schools saying, we need volunteer maths teachers for our children with cerebral palsy. And she came along as a volunteer, and she's absolutely loving it. And I was in that classroom, you know, she was enjoying it. Teaching maths already. But she was enjoying it, the kids were enjoying it, and she felt good. But it was timing, and it was where the message went to as well. You know, so if you want people to sell baskets, where? Mosques, churches, temples, for you, hospitals, where people are sitting waiting for things is always a good place because they're a bit bored. So doctors' surgeries, dentists. You know, if you're at the dentist and you're worrying about your tooth, it's maybe reading about somebody that's worse off than you might be. So you think, where does the message go? Now another way, as well as these targeted messages, and we talked about the mass market where you put an advert and you get all sorts of undesirable people. Personal recommendation. Now that's often a good way of finding new volunteers. Somebody that's already worked with eHomemakers, someone you know from family or you know about your organisation. But sometimes then it's difficult to turn people down because you know Cecilia's friend comes along and the organisation say, well, Cecilia's friend, you know, she's absolutely hopeless. She's terrible, you know, and she puts people off. But we really don't want to upset Cecilia, so we'll, you know. So that's an issue that you have to be aware of. Also, she's Cecilia's friend. She's got all the same ideas as Cecilia. They've got the same social circle and so on. Now, what Cecilia has to offer is great, but do we want more of the same, or do we want somebody different? So, if everyone you're getting, if all your volunteers are coming, you know, from Jama Masjid Mosque, then don't you want maybe to have some volunteers from, you know, St. Christopher's or from the Taoist temple or Hindu temple, so that you know, I'm suggesting you might want a wider group of people who will come with new ideas. Selling baskets, where do you get volunteers? Do you ask people who work in shops? Maybe not, because they do that all week, so they want to do something different on their day off. I don't know. Now another thing is, when you have volunteers,
Yes.
they're coming to do a job.
Sorry, who's this?
They're not coming as unprofessional, bless you, unprofessional, you know, dog's bodies. So it is perfectly reasonable and sensible to have an application form available. If your volunteers are going to do written work, they're going to make displays or whatever, you might want them to write you a letter, so you know that they can write English or Chinese or whatever language you want them to work in. Now, especially for the SLE organisation, you want references. If someone's going to be a counsellor, you want to make sure that they are sound, that they're going to be okay for that job. Also for baskets, selling baskets, you want to know that they're honest, that they can be trusted. So you may ask for references. That makes it seem very formal, but it adds a level of professionalism both to your organisation and to the role of your supporter. It's not always necessary, but I think it's good. So if you've got an application form, again, what's the job? And remember, you wrote all the job descriptions for all the volunteers you need, not just the basket sellers, but you know, people that are going to do your stock control, and people that are going to go out and collect and bring, the drivers, all these jobs. You've got all these jobs now, and you've got them in a nice folder in a desk drawer, so that the minute somebody says to you, I want to be a volunteer, they can look through. So your application follows that. What job do you like out of that lot? Basic personal details, what are your qualifications? Why do you want to be a volunteer? Why do you want to volunteer with us? Why this NGO? Why can you come? Who are your references? So it's a general application form. And again, you may think that it's a bit formal, but you're adding that level of credibility and professionalism to your organisation that helps your reputation. And it also allows you to sift out people that may or may not be useful. So you're not wasting your time training people that aren't going to spend long with you. You spoke earlier, someone mentioned foreign volunteers. I think it was you, wasn't it? I mean, this is very, very essential if you're having people coming in from somewhere else that you understand. Now, I love this picture. I've seen so many people look like me. But whenever you, does that ring a bell? I don't think you're allowed to beat up your work. You can do it later. We talked about your image. Applications, deal with them quickly. If last week someone emailed you and you thought, what do I do with them? Did you answer them? Or did you wait and say, well, once I've figured it out, I'll get back to them? You don't have to tell me. But deal with it quickly. It gets your image is then good. Otherwise, we've heard stories, I volunteered for such and such an organisation months ago and I've had nothing. They just don't care. You still go through the same process you would if you're employing someone. Now this is hopeful that you will have a lot of volunteers. But it's better to have one good volunteer than 20 that are driving you nuts and not able to do the job and wasting your time. So looking at all of those, even if you only have one volunteer, check them out. Are they going to be useful or not? Don't take people who are not useful, that are going to cause you problems. And this, you spoke about this morning, your speculative approach. Somebody comes along and says, I'd like to help. Thank you very much. That's the first thing. Thank you for your offer. If they're doing it from a distance, if they've phoned up or emailed or something, send them some information about your organisation. Send them your list of jobs. Send them your application form and treat them like any other applicant. And this is really a bit where the Friday afternoon syndrome comes in. When everybody's gone and the only person left is the office caretaker, someone comes along and says, I want to volunteer. Now you've got an option here. You can have the caretaker stand there and look at them. So we've got horns. Or you can have all of this in an envelope at the reception gate and say, if anyone comes, say thank you, give them this, and they can go away and digest the information. So all of it's there ready to capture whoever might come. And I think this looks like one of Alan's one.
Okay.
So I'll hand over to him. Give you time to breathe. And conscious that we're rattling through very fast. But, as I say, we normally do it over 3 days, so we're trying to get as much in as we can. Once we reach the end, we can perhaps take questions.
Well, you can ask questions at any time.
Yeah.
Oh, do I smile? Yeah, okay. So we're going to talk about how you manage volunteers now, okay? This guy here is a friend of mine. He's a former army colonel. He retired. He was looking for something to do, and so he volunteered to be an administrative manager really for a big charity. So it's another example. What we're going to talk about is the supporter letter. We're going to talk about supervisors. We're going to talk about induction training. We're going to talk about the code of practice, the trial period, and support and supervision. Okay? So am I using the... Yeah, we go. Okay, so the supporter letter. So once you have selected someone, so someone has come in, you've given the job description, they've said yes please, they've applied, and you've appointed them. The next thing you do is send them a letter which says basically what they've agreed to do, what the job's going to be, how many hours, on what days. Okay, and it's just a nice thing to get to say that they have been accepted as a volunteer in your organisation. And we have known volunteers, some organisations use a lot of rural volunteers who are maybe not very well educated, but they're doing kind of social type work, helping poor rural communities. And when they get a letter saying they have been appointed as a volunteer, they frame it and put it up in their house. They're very proud of it. So don't underestimate, people who want to be a volunteer in your organisation, and you send them a letter saying, yes, you're accepted, this is when you start, this is what you'll do. They can be quite proud of it. Okay? It will say things like, you've agreed to work. So you say to them, when can you work? And they say, I'd like to work every Tuesday morning from 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you say, okay, fine, that's good, that's what I need. And then in their letter, it will say that you agreed to work those times. And they sign it, which kind of commits them. So although it's entirely voluntary, it's a lot of people say to us, well, how do you get the volunteers to actually work the hours that you want them to work, to turn up on the days when you're depending on them? This sort of thing helps. Okay? So it gives a job, it gives a commitment every Tuesday, 8 o'clock. It tells them that the trial period in this case is 8 weeks. Tells them who the supervisor is going to be. So when you report on Tuesday morning, see Thomas or see Cecilia. Okay? Now that's good because as a new volunteer you like to know where you stand. I've been in situations where I once went into, I worked in a hospital in Gambia, and I went in to see my friend who was in charge of PR, and there was this guy sitting there, and he was Caucasian, and so I kind of looked at him and said, hi, how are you? And I went and did my work. Came back about 4 hours later, this guy's still sitting there, so I said, are you being looked after? He said, I don't know, I think so. And I said, well, who are you? What are you doing? And he said, oh, my name's David, I'm a doctor. I volunteered to be a doctor here. I paid all my own expenses. I've flown from America. I said, well, why are you still sitting here? He said, well, nobody knows what to do with me. And what a way to treat a volunteer. So I sorted it out. You don't want to have that happening in your organisation. If you've got a volunteer coming, you want to know when they're coming, and you want to have a supervisor. So when the person turns up, they can say, hello, I want to see Cecilia. Okay, fine. Okay. The letter would say what the supporter hopes to get from the NGO, and that's usually self-satisfaction or whatever, and what the NGO expects, and that is to work for 5 hours once a week selling baskets or whatever, just whatever the equipment is. You mention the code of practice. If you're going to give expenses, you mention the expenses, so they know where they stand. That's simple as that. Okay. The supervisor should meet the supporter on the first day they turn up. All right. Let's not have people sitting around your office looking lost. Okay. That can make a huge difference. If the supporters welcomed in, they think, what a great organisation. If the supporter is left sitting outside, they think, they don't need me, they don't want me, they don't love me. So, okay. You need to do induction training. Fairly straightforward. There's 4 parts to it really, and it's always the same 4 headings. Organisational information. What does your organisation do? How big is it? How many people do you employ? What's your aim in life? Okay. What are the procedures? Some cases, child protection is one procedure, but you will have accounts procedures, you will have operating procedures. How do you deal with stock control? How do you deal with selling baskets? How do you deal with all the other things you do? You will have written standard operating procedures. So you train the volunteer in your standard operating procedures that affect the volunteer. Okay? So that's 1 and 2. What's the job? So you train the volunteer what you want them to do. If it's, this is induction training, this is just on their first day. So here you'd want to show them the stock room, you'd want to show them where they pick up the baskets, so all of that stuff they need to know, and that may take several hours. In the case of your organisation, the induction training may be longer if you've got to train them on counselling techniques and so on. And then there's personal stuff. Where's the kitchen? Where's the coffee? Where's the tea? Where's the toilet? Where can you stick your handbag? Stuff like that, personal stuff. Those four things, personal stuff, the supporter's role. Oops, I want to go back. So start off, what's the organisation about? What's our standard operating procedures? And then what the supporter has to do, and the personal stuff. It's always the same, but every organisation, those 4 headings. And then you fill in the bits that you need. Okay, I think I've talked already about the probation period, why it's good, why it's important. It's good for staff as well as for volunteers. So you have an assessment period, and the volunteer knows that they're in for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it is. And at the end of that time, the contract will automatically break, or the arrangement will automatically break, unless you're extending. What we find at that period is that 95% of volunteers, maybe 90% of volunteers, you get to the end of that period and you say, well, we like what you're doing, you're very useful to us, how do you feel? And they say, oh, great, fine. In some small cases, it may be they say, I don't like selling baskets, I can't stand it. And you can say, well, what else? We've got other jobs that you might want to do. You could maybe work in the office, okay? So you offer them another volunteer job. In the case of Lupus Association, they may find counselling too traumatic. So at the end of that induction period, they may say, well, I love the organisation, I love meeting other people, but this one-to-one stuff is just too heavy. What else can I do? And you may say, well, here's a job in the office, here's a job in transport, here's a job, whatever. Okay. On very, very small cases, the person doesn't work out. And you say, well, thank you very much for your help. They're enormously beneficial, but we no longer have that role. We've got plenty of other people helping, so I'm sorry, but we don't need you. And they can go without bad feeling. And at the same time, they can say to you, well, I've enjoyed my 2 months with you or 3 months, but I want to go out and save the world by counting trees or something. So it's good for both sides. Support and supervision. You often see this in NGO seminars, support and supervision. Support is for the volunteer, where you're giving the volunteer information about your organisation, about what you're aiming to do, the background. You give them more training. Often you need to give encouragement. It's nice to say to volunteers, well done, thank you. Counselling. Volunteers often have problems of their own, and it's nice to be able to talk to them about, you know, any problems they're having, getting to work, dealing with the children, dealing with parents, sorting out personal problems. So you support the volunteer, and then you supervise the task. So then you would say to the volunteer, you know, particularly if you've got people selling baskets remotely from the office. So you might want to, if you're not going to see the volunteer, you might want to mobile phone them and say, you know, what are the issues you're facing today? What's the best thing that's happened today? What's the worst thing that's happened today? How do you think we can improve it? And you will get feedback from the volunteer. Now, A, the volunteer feels needed, wanted, you're interested in, and B, you find out what's gone wrong. Like, none of the other volunteers have turned up, I'm on my own, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I'm fed up. And you can say, okay, we can. But then you know what's happening. You've got time as a manager to sort the problems out. So talking to your volunteer is good. How's the work going? You know, are we selling enough baskets? Are there any issues I can, as a manager, I can deal with to help the job going? Similarly, if you've got counsellors who are working remotely, it's good to keep in touch with them and find out how they're doing it. So it's asking open questions. You don't say, how are you? Fine. How's the job going? Great. I prefer to ask questions like, what's the best thing that's happened? What have you achieved today? Describe obstacles that's getting in your way. And that way you get much more information. As a manager, I want that information before it goes wrong, so I've got time to do something about it. What I don't want is to hear nothing from the volunteer, and then the next time they're scheduled to turn up at the hospital, they don't. And you think, why? And maybe there's some disaster happened, and you haven't spoken to your volunteer, and they have not spoken to you, and you don't know why. And then to try to recover that situation is very difficult. Or worse, you get a doctor phoning you up saying, if that volunteer turns up again, they're going to be trying. Yeah. So that's why you supervise. Okay. So monitoring and evaluation, informal chats. That's what I like. If you've got volunteers who are going to be in the organisation for a while, which you hope, then you want to set up 6 monthly discussions. And those are one-to-one, face-to-face, and it's a two-way thing. So you're saying to the volunteer, here are some of the issues, you know, you've turned up on time every time, you've sold lots and lots of baskets, we're very happy with what you're doing. How are we doing? Are we fulfilling your needs as an organisation? Are we giving you what you expect to get from an organisation? How could it be better? Would you like to do more work? Would you like to do less work? That sort of thing. Okay. So every 6 months, even with your volunteers, have a chat with them, have a discussion, two-way discussion. What you think of them, what they think of you. Okay. Best done by Ching-Ching, actually. Or if you're a big organisation, with their supervisor. Okay, and write it down for the 6 monthly ones. But don't forget the regular and formal chats. So incredibly valuable. Okay. News feedback. Supporters love to hear what's happening. If you've got people selling baskets, do you tell them how many baskets you've sold? Now, I don't know if you're organising teams of basket promoters or it's just on individual occasions. But if you've had a volunteer who's been selling baskets for you and then they're not doing it the next time, do you tell them how it's going? They'd be jolly interested. Okay? They like to hear what's happening. They like to hear about new developments. There was one charity that we dealt with, and they had quite a lot of volunteers. Some of them volunteered for a month at a time, full time, once a year. And then they were associated with a religious organisation. I think they were Hindu. And so how do you keep in contact with these people? How do you keep these people coming back? Because you only see them for a month, and then in 11 months, there's nothing. And what they did was that everybody that helped them, they put them onto their volunteer database, and then they had a thing like DOMA, it was an automatic telephone system. And so every month you got a text from them, and because they had recorded my mobile phone number and Margaret's, we got the same sort of thing. So every month you got, we're building a polio unit. And you'd say, oh, that's interesting. Oh, look, they're building a polio unit. So it reminded you about the organisation. Or it would say, we've had a lot of inmates. They were kind of a rescue organisation, took people off the streets. So they said, oh, you know, we've had 100 people down and out on the streets, and we've taken them off the streets, and so we rescued 100 people. And you think, oh, so every month you would get a message, and they sent this out to all the volunteers as a blanket message.
Yeah, can I make a point on that one? It wasn't, please help us to do something else.
It was just a
It
message.
was just information. It wasn't asking for more. And I think that's another
Keeping them informed.
Just keep
them. So if everybody who helped you selling baskets, if you said we had a record month and we sold however many baskets, you just send it to everybody. Keeps them in a picture. And they think, wow, great. Or we've helped 50 women or whatever. Or we're building a new office. Or you know, we're going to paint it. Or we just cleaned the toilet. You know. Just information to your volunteers makes them feel a part of your organisation, makes them feel more involved. Okay? Comment?
No, I said that's a very good idea to send out SMSs.
Yeah.
Monthly news bulletin.
That's all. Simple. And you're particularly well able to do that because of DOMA. It's amazing how effective it is. Because Margaret and I used to get these messages and we'd look, oh, you know, gosh. Sometimes they just laid new flower beds, landscaped the grounds of the place. And you just thought, oh, and you talked about it. Anyway. Volunteer code of practice. This is the rules that you put in place for your volunteers. Okay? And it starts with simple issues and then it expands. And particularly useful for foreign volunteers. Once you've got a code of practice, and I think you do have a code of practice, don't you? Okay, never mind. So, it's a written thing, and it's basically rules that volunteers have to abide by. Like arrive on time, report your supervisor, claim expenses, if you want to take time off, tell somebody, if you're not allowed to smoke in the building, you're not allowed to smoke in the building, and so on. So very, very simple rules. But then you can add more complicated rules as you go on. For instance, what is the rule of visitors coming in here? I don't know, but you will have a rule. I mean, will you allow your volunteers to bring a friend in, for instance? Maybe you will, maybe you won't. What about Lupus Association? Are your counsellors allowed to take a friend with them when they go to do counselling? Probably not. Are your counsellors allowed to photograph the beneficiaries? Probably not. Are any of your volunteers allowed to talk to the media? Okay. If a newspaper man speaks to one of your volunteers and says, oh, I see you're selling baskets, would you like to give me a quote? Would you like to give me a story about what you're doing for these women? Is it okay for your volunteer to talk to the TV or the newspapers? Probably not, because you don't know what they're going to say, and they're not in possession of all the facts. So you want to tell your volunteers that sort of thing at the beginning. If the volunteer has got a problem, what is the procedure for dealing with it? So if the volunteer is not doing what they should be doing, how do you deal with it? And usually there's very simple things like you give them a verbal warning and another verbal warning, and if there's no improvement you give them a written warning, 2 written warnings, and you dispense with their services. Similarly, what happens if the volunteer has a grievance with your organisation? How do they deal with it? Normally they take it to the supervisor first, and if that doesn't work, they're allowed to take it to the CEO. All pretty standard stuff. But you put it into your code of practice, so it's written down. Now this is good because they know what the rules are. Okay. Do you want to share that one with us, Johan? No? Okay. Well, I know what it says. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So, just around the table, what ideas would you have to put into your code of practice for volunteers?
Yeah. So you have to promote a positive image. Now, eHomemakers is great. It's got the webs. In your 17,000 members or whatever the latest number is. And that's one way. People have heard of it, it's got a reputation within the country. I know of your organisation because of coming here. I don't know of its reputation in the country because I haven't been working in that area. But you need to have a good reputation and promote your organisation. Now sometimes write brochures, but again these are expensive things for a small organisation. What you have to do though is to get your recruitment message right. And people help people. People don't help organisations. People want to help individuals, people they know. So you have to think about what are the needs of the people you work with. What are the needs of your beneficiaries? What will happen if you don't meet those needs? And how can the volunteers or the supporters help in that? What can they do to help? As I said, don't worry about the notes because this is now on this machine. And again, we looked at it earlier. We have to emphasise the benefits to the supporter. What can your organisation offer the volunteer that's going to make them want to come to you? It may be fulfilling work. It may be, I mean, often when it's working, say, with children with disabilities, you go in and you get these glorious smiles. You get that, and you go home feeling good. At one time I volunteered in a psychiatric hospital. I used to go there on a Friday evening, and I'd be tired and I'd think, why am I going here? And I'd spend 2 hours working with individual patients, and it was such fun, and I felt great when I came out, and I had more energy afterwards. than when I went in. So fulfilling work is a benefit. Maybe expenses paid if your organisation can afford that. Training given, now that is a real plus, particularly for your organisation, because your volunteers will then have a wider knowledge. So that's part of your recruitment message. What are the benefits to the supporter? Simple contact information with a name. People don't want to ring up a telephone number with somebody anonymous at the other end. So if you're interested in volunteering, contact Karen, contact Aisha, contact Thomas, contact a named person. You've all been refreshed by your cup of tea. You can do this on your own, or maybe two working in twos so that you can help each other. But think of a person who needs your help, one of the people that you work with. What will happen if you can't, as an organisation, get support? What will happen to that person? What can the volunteer do? What training will do? Who should they contact? So that should take you about 30 seconds, but we'll give you about 5 minutes. Okay? A recruitment message for your volunteer. And I'll move out of the way.
Another question.
Yes, Charlotte, sorry.
I mean, the last point was supposed to be full training will be provided. Okay?
Yes, okay.
Of course, when we give them the training, we expect them, to help out the thing. Why do we provide the training and
They do nothing.
at the end of the training they say bye bye?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing is, and we'll look at that after the recruitment message, we'll look at retention. So can we leave that until we've done the message? But that's an excellent question. It's about your investment of time. So we'll come back to
And so I
that.
wonder whether that can be put in the policy.
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's have a recruitment message then. Are we going to split into two groups? Do you want these, Thomas, do you still want to volunteer?
Sure.